Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm really sorry that I can't be there with you today, but I know you're going to do a great job in my absence. As always, I am going to encourage you to take notes during the video lecture. If at any time I'm moving too fast, please just have the sub stop the video so that you can go ahead and catch up. So today we are going to finish the reign of Napoleon, but I just kind of wanted to review what we've talked about so far. So Napoleon growing up, remember he was born on the island of Corsica, was kind of rambunctious. Mom has to send him to Paris for a military education where he completely excels. We really saw Napoleon shine during phase 2 of the French Revolution. He is a military hero, winning back territory in France, northern Italy. He did have the one minor blemish on his record about the defeat in Egypt, but nobody knew about it because he paid all the newspapers. We really see his rise to power begin in France with the consul. He really admires, Julius Caesar and that consul with the 3 men controlling the country, very much like the first triumvirate. However, Napoleon does take the position as first consul. Now, in his position as first consul, he creates the Code of Napoleon, which, if you had been a Frenchman at that time, was actually a really good thing. I mean, he establishes the Bank of France, so economic situation quiets down, reestablishes relations with the Catholic Church, creates the plebiscite by giving every free male the right to vote, promoting education, science, the use of reason. Now, again, that plebiscite is kind of interesting in that, yes, he's giving every free man the right to vote, but remember when he went in to vote, Napoleon and his codes were the only thing on the ballot. But he is elected consul for life, very much like Julius Caesar was elected dictator for life. And then eventually there was the defining moment when he is crowned emperor. And you guys remember the scene. He actually took the crown from the Pope and crowned himself because no one was worthy of crowning Napoleon emperor except himself. But I think that's where we kind of see the peak of Napoleon's reign as emperor, and what should have been amazing because, you had the best military, you are a military hero, absolutely nothing limits you or stands in your way, but now we kind of see this downward slide. He tries to pick a fight with the British, because of course the British and the French have been fighting since their very existence. But he goes to attack them by sea. Now, Napoleon may be great on the ground, but he is not the best at a navy, and that is what the British are famous for. So he is going to lose at the Battle of Trafalgar to Admiral Horatio Nelson. Even though Nelson is killed at the battle, the British do still win. Napoleon kind of does a childish act almost with the continental system to try to get back at the British for his loss. He basically says, okay, I'm not going to trade with you. Nobody else is allowed to trade with you. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. He's trying to choke the British out. But actually what he's going to end up doing is he's going to make some other people in Europe pretty mad because they want to trade with the British. They don't care what Napoleon in France wants to do. They want to have open trade with the British. So that's where we're going to pick up our story today. I kind of want to show you this picture of Napoleon because, again, I think we're seeing a change here. You think back to some of the earlier pictures, you had the strong, confident leader, eventually being crowned emperor, and now we see him a little bit older, again, still in the military uniform, kind of slumped over, not looking too happy. Okay, so Tsar Alexander I of Russia decides to withdraw his alliance with France because of how unhappy he is with that continental system. And this makes a lot of sense. Remember, those Russians fought 2 wars to get a warm water port on that Baltic Sea. So here comes Napoleon, and he basically shuts off trade with the British. The Russians are like, we're not having that. So Tsar Alexander I pretty much is like challenging Napoleon, like, hey, you need to knock this off. Now, you remember, Napoleon is a military man. He was a military hero. So if you challenge him, it's common sense, you guys, he's going to come at you with his military. And they were good. And he had a large standing ground army. He actually assembles what is known historically as the Grande Armée. Now, he went from 20 different nations that were under French occupation, and he assembled, you guys, almost 600,000 soldiers. So this is definitely a massive, massive army that is going to attempt to invade Russia. This is all happening in 1812. Again, it's pretty much because the Tsar decided he was going to withdraw the alliance. He's mad at Napoleon for the continental system. Napoleon responds by, okay, well, I'm taking my military and we're going to go trucking into Russia. And it's not just him, he is going 600,000 strong. But I want you to take a minute, look at the left-hand side, look at the map of Russia, you guys. This is a massive, massive country and a massive empire. And if you're going to invade them, that's also giving Russia the home front advantage. Now, Russia has this absolutely fabulous policy called scorched earth. Basically, what they will do, it's almost like cat and mouse. They're going to let the French keep chasing them deeper and deeper into Russia. And what they'll do is they will burn down all the resources as they are retreating backwards. So they'll burn any houses, they'll burn any fields, any buildings. And you might be thinking like, well, why would the Russians be burning their own stuff? But it's actually really brilliant because it leaves nothing for the French to survive on. So you just imagine the French are trucking farther and farther into Russian territory. All the Russians are going to keep doing is retreating farther and farther back. Russians know how to survive in Russia. Again, they're on home territory advantage. French are getting farther and farther away from France. They're also getting farther and farther away from resources, from supplies. This is not going to work. It is very difficult to successfully invade Russia. If Adolf Hitler had paid a little bit more attention, he might have avoided this exact same mistake in World War II. It is the scorched earth policy by the Russians. It is going to work 100%. In October of 1812, Napoleon is going to have to go on retreat. But here's another problem that happens. You are now trapped literally in the middle of Russia, and you're going to get hit with a Russian winter. You are very far away from Paris, from France, from any supplies, from any materials, and you're going to get hit with winter. When that Grand Armée left France, they were not prepared for winter. I mean, average temperatures during a Russian winter, you guys, are negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're going to lose a lot of men, not from combat, but from simply starving to death, from freezing to death, from dying of exposure to the cold. Of Napoleon's original 600,000 soldiers of the Grand Armée, you guys, he comes back with only 20,000. That means 580,000 French soldiers died in Russia, not necessarily from combat, but because of starvation and exposure from the cold. Needless to say, Napoleon's track record as a military genius and hero has taken a devastating blow right here. Okay, show you guys on the map kind of this scorched earth policy and what's happening. So you imagine your French troops are trucking into Russia like this, right? But all the Russians are going to do is back up, and they're going to keep going farther and farther inland into Russia. And as they back up, they burn all the supplies. So the French have nothing, and they just keep going farther and farther and farther until Napoleon finally realizes in October, okay, we're not going to win this. But now you've got to turn around and go back. And that was in October, so you think November, December, January. Now all of these guys are trapped in Russia in a Russian winter. 580,000 men are going to be lost because of this failed campaign. This is a very famous painting associated with Napoleon's failed invasion of Russia. It was pretty neat. I actually got to see at the museum the coat and hat that you just saw in that picture that Napoleon was wearing when he was forced to go on retreat from Russia. Here's another really good painting. There's also a scandalous story attached with this. A lot of reports at the time said that Napoleon had been killed in Russia, but come to find out, he had actually retreated months ahead of his troops. So while all of those guys are trying to walk back to France in the Russian winter, Napoleon was already in Paris. Again, if you're branding yourself as a military hero, that's not a very admirable move by a military commander. Again, here's a picture of Napoleon during the failed Russian invasion. This is a quote said of the failed Russian invasion, in Napoleon's wake was a mob of tattered ghosts, draped in odd pieces of carpet, or greatcoats burned full of holes, their feet wrapped in all sorts of rags. We stared in horror at those skeletons of soldiers went by, their gaunt, gray faces covered with disfiguring beards, without weapons, with lowered heads, eyes on the ground, in absolute silence. Now, this was said by one of the Russian soldiers as the French were walking by. Again, they were so weak, the Russians didn't even waste ammunition to kill them. They were dying because of hunger, starvation, and exposure to the cold. Sorry this picture's a little grainy, but the French troops became so desperate. I mean, they ate their shoes, their belts, they ate any horses, any animals they had. Unfortunately, there are some reports of cannibalism even happening. Again, your military hero now has a major blemish on his record. You know, he kind of hid the one that happened in Egypt, but then you had the loss at the Battle of Trafalgar, and now you have this very, very public, very devastating failed invasion of Russia. So with Napoleon back in Paris, we have to kind of decide, okay, well, what happens now? Obviously, Napoleon is not the man that we thought he was. This is not going to work. Now, there was something that was forming against him that's actually going to be pretty dangerous. In 1813, we saw the Quadruple Alliance start to form. Now, quadruple being 4, so you have Austria, Great Britain, Prussia, and Russia. Those 4 nations decide to align together basically against France. So they are going to challenge Napoleon at the Battle of Nations. Again, Napoleon has just suffered this very public, very devastating loss in Russia, and now here comes the Quadruple Alliance. They challenge him at the Battle of Nations. Napoleon is going to be defeated. Now, what do we do with him? We don't necessarily want to kill Napoleon, I think for a couple of reasons. One is there still was a lot of public support for him. We can't ignore the fact that he did save France from the revolution. I think there was another reason why as well. They didn't want to kill him because they don't want to go back to those days of the Reign of Terror. We're trying to stay away from killing people in France. So in 1814, Napoleon is abdicated. That means he is stripped of his title as emperor, and he's actually going to be exiled to Elba. That means he can never come back to France. He can never leave the island of Elba. Basically, he has to stay there for the rest of his life. So if you guys look at this map, here's the Italian peninsula, and then right here off the coast, that's the island of Elba, and that's where Napoleon is supposed to stay for the rest of his life. What the Quadruple Alliance decides to do for France is they are going to bring in the brother of Louis XVI. Remember the one we cut his head off? They're going to bring in his brother, Louis XVIII, to reign as the monarch of France. And I think they were going to give it another go, kind of with that limited monarchy. But then, like, one of the most scandalous things in history happens. Napoleon actually escaped from Elba. Napoleon escaped from the island that he was supposed to be exiled on, and I think it's no question, you guys, where he is going. But what I love about Napoleon is that he didn't try to hide after his escape from Elba. I mean, Napoleon was going to Paris, and he was going to make a production of it. He didn't hide. He goes trucking into Paris, guns blazing, basically declares, I am the Emperor of France, you know, come challenge me. And that is what is going to happen. Your Quadruple Alliance will come at him once again. They will challenge him at the Battle of Waterloo. It's in what is present-day Belgium. So you have Prussia, Russia, Austria, and the British going against Napoleon. He will lose this one the same way that he lost at the Battle of Nations. This time period from when Napoleon escapes from Elba up until the Battle of Waterloo, it's known as the 100 Days. Again, it was kind of Napoleon's last chance, basically his last-ditch effort to try to prove himself as a military hero and to regain control of France. And unfortunately, he does not do that. Now this time, the Quadruple Alliance, we get a little bit smarter. Maybe don't exile him so close to Europe. So they exile him to St. Helena. If you look at this map over here, you guys, this is South America, or excuse me, this is, hello, Africa. Over here you have South America, and right here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you have the island of St. Helena. So that is where Napoleon will be exiled for the second time. Here's a diagram of the, or excuse me, here's a battle map of the Battle of Waterloo. Again, you imagine on this side you have your quadruple alliance. That's Prussia, Austria, Russia, and the British fighting against Napoleon and the French. You think about what was at stake. I mean, Napoleon knows that this is the last shot. He has to give it everything he's got if he is going to be successful, and we know that he does not win. Napoleon loses at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, and he is going to be exiled for the second time to St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, Napoleon will spend 6 years on St. Helena. He's going to die on May 5th, 1821. Now, everybody always kind of thinks like, oh, being exiled out on St. Helena, you know, they kind of think like castaway. He was living on the beach, you know, and eating coconuts. No. There was a settlement on St. Helena. He lived in a home. He was with his family. He had like 3 physicians. He had servants. So it was a comfortable life for Napoleon, even in exile. Now, Napoleon's death itself is kind of a scandal. It was said with his last words that it was France, army, head of army, and Josephine. Remember, we talked the other day about Josephine being his great love, and the only reason he divorced her was for a political alliance. What you guys are looking at on the right-hand side, that has been verified as the death mask of Napoleon. So what you're looking at is the face of Napoleon Bonaparte just moments after his death. Now, we talked about his death, and again, there's so many scandals associated with Napoleon and with his name. He did have 3 physicians when he passed away. One of them was British, and that might come into play in just a minute. But one theory was Napoleon died of stomach cancer. His father also passed away from stomach cancer. When they did the autopsy and they opened up his stomach, they did find ulcers. They did find kind of like a black, gangrenous, like guck almost, signifying that there was some sort of cancerous matter in there. But there's also a theory that Napoleon was murdered, that he was poisoned, and the poison of choice was arsenic. So one of the doctors said that when they performed the autopsy, Napoleon smelled strongly of arsenic. Now, also adding to the theory of him being poisoned, some of Napoleon's hair was cut off during the autopsy and saved. And then a few years later, they were doing different tests on it, and they found that his hair tested very, very high for arsenic. Now, something to combat that, we do know that on the island of St. Helena, there is a specific type of citrus fruit that is naturally very high in arsenic. So we don't know if the arsenic levels were coming from poison, were they coming naturally from fruit. Now, Napoleon is going to be buried on the island of St. Helena. It was not his choice, not what he wanted. So 19 years later, they are going to unbury him and bring him back to Paris, France. Okay, kind of getting into the arsenic again, it was said when they unburied him, his body was very well preserved. Arsenic acts as a natural preservation method. So I don't know, it's kind of up to you to decide what actually happened to Napoleon on his deathbed. You kind of think about the pros and the cons of this man. You know, he's a very complex character, like what we saw with Julius Caesar, what we see with Alexander the Great. You know, you kind of ask yourself, are they a good guy, bad guy? I mean, we can't ignore what he did for France with the Code of Napoleon, with, you know, bringing education, science, reasoning, creating the Bank of France that still exists today. I mean, he solved pretty much the economic crisis. He gave man the right to vote, spread those revolutionary and Enlightenment ideas. You can't ignore that he pulled France from the revolution. But on the other side, pretty much as soon as he did that, he does become an absolute ruler, and he does become the Emperor of France. Again, he leaves Josephine, makes a political marriage with Austria, puts his brother in charge of Spain, and I think we saw he became obsessed with this expansion of territory. You know, he tried to take on the British and he failed. He tried to take on the Russians and he failed. He tried to take on the Quadruple Alliance and he failed there as well. So good guy, bad guy, is he a leader of France or is he a villain to France? I don't know, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons. I love this quote by Napoleon, never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. Now, speaking of bringing Napoleon back to France, so like I said, 19 years after his death, they dug him up. and they were allowed to bring his body back to Paris, France. Because he was seen as a leader of France, he was given a grand procession. What you're looking at right here, this is Les Invalides. It is a military museum. It's a military hospital. It was actually built by Louis the 16th for his, or excuse me, Louis the 14th for his troops. So this is the cathedral that is on, or is in Les Invalides. Now Napoleon is going to be tombed basically right underneath this golden dome on the top. So the story was that when they were bringing Napoleon's body down the street, you know, through the streets of Paris, everyone was lining up to see the body of the emperor, the coffin of the emperor. It was very dreary, it was raining, and then all of a sudden, right when they pulled Napoleon up outside of the chapel, or excuse me, of the cathedral where he was going to be entombed, all of a sudden the clouds broke, the sun was shining, and it was reflecting right off of that gold dome, almost as if it was like a message from Napoleon himself. So this is underneath that dome that I was showing you. This is the coffin of Napoleon. Now it's 3 layered, so you've got like a layer of gold, you've got a layer of lead, and that red that you see on the outside, it is red marble. So I don't think there's any chance we're going to get this open, but this is where Napoleon has been entombed ever since. So again, you kind of think, good guy, bad guy. I've got something for you guys to work on. If you have any questions, you're free to email me. But good luck.